Hello, my friends. I want to welcome you to our channel, which will help you fall asleep easily and with benefit. Share with us where you're watching from right now and what time it is for you. And while you're writing, I'll begin. Write where you are watching us from and what time it is for you right now. Hit like and subscribe to the channel. Introduction. This is the age of silence. Ancient legends whisper their truth here without disturbing the silence, deepening the night and calming the mind. Without fuss, without extraneous sounds, only the passage of time, darkness, and the experience of centuries. If you are comfortable here, help the channel grow. Hit subscribe, like, and jot down in the comments what time it is in your region and where you are watching from. Even a few phrases will allow this tranquility to continue to exist. Let the age of silence greet you every night. And now let us look into the scrolls of the past. Listen to the silence of your surroundings and allow your consciousness to travel across the abyss of years into another reality, to places where dust rose to the heavens from the pounding of horses' hooves, and tales were forged that outlived their authors by hundreds of years. The conversation will be about a union whose name has become the embodiment of mystery, about the warriors of the sanctuary, the temple guards. Their annals did not begin in luxurious chambers or under triumphal arches, but on the scorched heights of Palestine, in a society torn apart by religious wars. Imagine Europe just emerging from the darkness of the early Middle Ages, overflowing with fervent and military religiosity. The path to Jerusalem, to the tomb of the Most High, was the cherished dream of every believing Christian. But this route was long, filled with suffering and mortal danger. Robbers lay in wait in mountain gorges, local princes demanded exorbitant tolls, and epidemics mowed down even the strongest. And then, in response to the suffering of pilgrims, a call rang out, a call not only to prayer, but to battle. Thus began the era of the Crusades. Thousands of people, from noble knights to simple peasants, rushed eastward to reclaim the lost shrines. And in 1099, after a long and brutal siege, Jerusalem surrendered to the Crusaders. It seemed the goal was achieved, but on the conquered territories not peace was established, but a fragile and bloody truce. The Crusader states remained mere islands in an ocean of hostile powers. The road arteries again became dangerous. Travelers, having reached the Holy Land, often found themselves powerless against new threats. And then, 20 years after the capture of Jerusalem, they appeared. Not rulers, not church hierarchs, but a small band of warriors, just 9 men, led by the French nobleman Hugues de Payenne. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Chronicles have not preserved their exact likenesses, but it is easy to imagine them, weather-beaten, stern faces, clad in modest, worn cloaks, individuals united by what seemed an unreal goal. Their mission was not fresh spoils or further conquests. Their mission, simple and yet immense, was defense, the defense of solitary pilgrims on the road from the port of Jaffa to Jerusalem. They vowed to protect those who came to touch the shrines. According to legend, King Baldwin II of Jerusalem himself gave them shelter in a part of his palace built on the foundation of the legendary Temple of Solomon. It is from here that their brief, later all-powerful designation originates: Templars, Knights of the Temple. They lived in poverty. It is said that even their emblem reflected this need: 2 riders on 1 horse, a sign that there were not even resources for a separate steed for each. But it was precisely in this need, in this renunciation of material wealth, that their initial, true power lay. They were not just warriors, they were monks, and herein lay their key feature. Previously, the Church viewed the shedding of blood as a sin, illit sometimes an unavoidable one. The Templars, however, united the seemingly conflicting, the strict rule of a monastic brotherhood with vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, with skilled combat prowess.
They prayed like hermits and fought like the best of warriors. Their rule, written with the participation of Bernard of Clairvaux, the famous mystic and preacher, was strict and severe. They were forbidden to possess personal property. They were obliged to cut their hair short, but not to shave their beards, to eat meat only 3 times a week to avoid coddling the body, and to obey their master without question. Their existence was dedicated to order, prayer, and combat. Combat not for spoils, but in the name of a higher mission from their perspective. And over time, gradually, word of these unusual warrior monks began to spread throughout Europe. People saw in them the ideal defenders of the faith, selfless, devoted, and invincible. Gifts and donations began to flow into the order's treasury in an unrelenting stream. Noble families sent their younger sons into its ranks, seeing in this a path to salvation of the soul and military glory. Lands, castles, monetary contributions, all of this poured into the Templars' vault. And here a remarkable transformation occurred. From a cell of poor warriors, the Order of the Temple began slowly but steadily to transform into something else, not only an elite military force, but also a powerful financial empire of the medieval era. It was the Templars, without realizing it themselves, who created many of the foundations of the banking craft known to us today. Imagine a pilgrim wishing to visit the Holy Land. Transporting a chest of coins was both risky and inconvenient, so he would go to a commandery, a local residence of the Templar order, spread throughout Europe. The traveler would deposit his funds there and receive in hand a kind of promissory note, drawn up on special, nearly unforgeable paper. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, at the local commandery of the Brotherhood, he would present this paper and receive back his funds, albeit in local currency and minus a small fee. This was a brilliant and simple technique. It inspired absolute trust, for who could be more trustworthy than monks who had taken a vow of poverty? The order became the creditor of kings and popes. Their treasuries were more reliable than monarchs. Their fortresses, scattered across Europe and the Middle East, became not just citadels, but secure vaults where noblemen and even states kept their valuables. The Templars had their own impeccable accounting, their own freight service, their own ships plying between Europe and the Levant. They organized the first global corporation in history, a prototype of modern multinational companies. Their white mantles with the crimson cross became a symbol not only of righteousness, but also of astonishing, almost mystical reliability and omnipotence. But behind the external grandeur and financial talent lay another intimate life of the community, and it is here that those very mysteries originate that shroud the history of the Templars in a thick haze. Their secrecy, their rigid initiation ceremonies, their subordination only to the Pope and their Grand Master, all of this bred envy, fear, and paranoia. What happened behind the walls of their castles, away from prying eyes? Rumors abounded that during the ritual of entry into the Brotherhood, recruits were forced to renounce the Savior, spit on the crucifix, and pray to a strange idol, often described as a bearded head called Baphomet. There was talk of secret nocturnal gatherings, experiments with alchemy and sorcery, hidden treasures, not only monetary but also sacred, perhaps the Holy Grail or some ancient scrolls containing forbidden knowledge. Most modern scholars agree that the majority of such accusations were fabricated, the product of a diseased mind or deliberate lies. More likely, these strange rituals, if they occurred at all, were part of a complex system of initiation initiation designed to test the steadfastness of the neophyte's faith, forcing him to undergo mockery of relics so that by then rejecting this sacrilege, he could be reborn to a new, more durable and meaningful faith. It was an ordeal of endurance, common to many closed groups. But for the outside world, for those ignorant of these details, such rumors were ready fuel for the fire already kindling at the base of their influence. And this power, by the beginning of the 14th century, had become truly colossal. Monarchs were drowning in debt to them. The Church viewed them with suspicion because their autonomy challenged episcopal authority. And most importantly, the historical era itself had changed. Jerusalem was lost. The final Crusader stronghold, the fortress of Acre, fell in 1291. The Templars, like other military monastic orders, were forced to leave Palestine. Their original purpose, protecting pilgrims in Jerusalem, had become irrelevant. The vast, wealthy, excellently coordinated, and powerfully armed structure found itself idle. It loomed over Europe like a sharp blade, subordinate to no one except its own master and the distant pope. And then, onto the stage steps a figure who decided to put an end to this autonomy. The King of France, Philip IV, called the Fair, a man of iron will, a cunning politician, and the possessor of a chronically depleted treasury. He was indebted to the Templars for enormous sums and realized that the powerful organization, with its castles throughout France, was a state within a state. The idea of freeing himself of debts, replenishing the budget, and simultaneously eliminating a dangerous rival became an obsession for him. All that was needed was a pretext, and it was found in those very rumors of apostasy, blasphemy, and idolatry. Friday, October 13th, 1307. This date is forever etched in history as the day a famous superstition was born. In the early morning, according to the king's secret orders, officials and guards throughout France opened sealed packets containing instructions. An unprecedented police operation in its scale and coordination began. Members of the all-powerful Brotherhood, just the day before untouchable, were seized right in their beds. Their fortresses were sealed, their property confiscated. A long, painful, and extremely biased trial began. To extract the necessary confessions, the Inquisition was brought in, with its primary tool, torture. Subjected to inhuman torments, many Templars, including the highest leadership of the order, confessed to everything they were accused of. They confirmed renunciation of Christ, spitting on the cross, worship of the idol, homosexual acts, and other transgressions. The Grand Master of the Brotherhood, Jacques de Molay, an elderly man, also broke and signed the required testimony. It seemed that King Philip had achieved everything, but then, in the isolation of prison, when the nightmare of torture had somewhat receded, de Molay and other leaders found the strength to recant their testimonies extracted by pain. They declared that they had lied under fear of torment, and now, before the face of God and eternity, they were ready to affirm their innocence and devotion to Christ. This act of unprecedented courage cost them their lives. A church synod convened in Vienne under pressure from the French crown ordered the dissolution of the Order of the Templars. And on March 18, 1314, on the Île des Juifs in Paris, a pyre was lit. On it were to burn the last Grand Master of the Brotherhood, Jacques de Molay, and the preceptor of Normandy, Geoffroy de Charny. According to legend, already amidst the flames, de Molay loudly, so that the assembled crowd heard, cursed King Philip IV and Pope Clement V, summoning them to God's judgment within the year. And this curse supposedly came true. The pontiff died a month later of dysentery. King Philip died the same year while hunting from a sudden stroke. This chilling story lent the end of the Templars an aura of mystical retribution, definitively transforming them from historical figures into heroes of legend. But what became of their countless treasures, their fleet, their archives? The chronicle's silent. Part of the wealth undoubtedly went to the crown, part to another powerful brotherhood, the Hospitallers. Yet rumors persist to this day that the main treasury was secretly evacuated from Paris on the eve of the arrests. It likely sailed away on Templar ships which vanished from all historical radar on that fateful date. Some scholars speculate that the Templar fleet might have refuged in Scotland or even reached the shores of America centuries before Columbus.
These hypotheses are, of course, dubious, yet they fuel an undying interest in the order. The spirit of the Templars, their symbols, their concepts of chivalric service and esoteric knowledge survived both the Inquisition's pyres and oblivion. They inspired the Freemasons of the 18th century, who saw in them the progenitors of their ideals of freedom, brotherhood, and reason. Their images are revived in books, from Walter Scott's Ivanhoe to Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Their name became synonymous with any influential and secretive society. So who were they in the final analysis? Innocently executed martyrs of the faith, slandered by greedy rulers? Or apostates who truly strayed from the righteous path and paid the price? Or perhaps rational administrators and bankers who suffered because of their own prosperity? There is no definitive answer, and in this uncertainty, in this haze enshrouding their white mantles with crimson crosses, lies their enduring mystery. They departed, leaving behind not merely a chronicle, but a legend, a tale of a brotherhood that was stronger than kings, wealthier than states, and which, even defeated, was able to cast a bold challenge at death itself, continuing to exist in stories, in the rustle of history, audible even today if one listens closely in the silence. Their strongholds were not just fortifications, they served as sensitive nodes of their empire, points where secular power touched religious fervor. Imagine the colossal structure of the Temple Fortress in Paris, or the impregnable Croix de Chevaliers. These walls protected not only gold, but knowledge. Templar libraries, according to some conjectures, may have contained manuscripts unknown to the rest of Europe, works of ancient philosophical heritage preserved in the East, manuscripts on alchemy and geometry brought from Arab lands. Their proximity to other cultures, to Islamic mystics and Jewish Kabbalists, certainly enriched their views, complicating and expanding them beyond the confines of official church ideology. This was not necessarily heresy. Perhaps it was an attempt to comprehend the divine through different prisms of human experience. Their financial operations required precise calculations, an advanced accounting system, implying a high degree of education and mathematical ability. They were not only swordsmen, but also accountants, not only monks, but also negotiators who engaged in dialogue with sultans. This multifaceted nature is what made them so exceptional and so dangerous to a more primitive and linear environment. Their internal structure was a complex and regulated mechanism where everyone understood their role. The knights, descendants of noble lineages who took full vows, formed the core. Below them were sergeants, also warriors but of simpler origin, and finally chaplains, priests responsible for the spiritual component of the brethren. There were also squires, craftsmen, and a countless number of civilian servants who ensured the functioning of this colossal empire. Their white mantle with the red cross was not merely a uniform, it was a sign, visible from afar, a testament of belonging to a powerful brotherhood, commanding respect from some and sowing fear in others. Their trial against them became one of the first incidents in history of what we would now call information warfare. King Philip the Fair, before initiating the arrests, skillfully spread rumors, shaping in the public consciousness the image of the Templars as arrogant, debauched, and mired in vice apostates. It was a calculated smear campaign so that the public would not rush to defend the humble Knights of Christ. And it worked. When the arrests began, many welcomed them, seeing in it an act of piety of the monarch, cleansing the realm of filth. The tortures inflicted on the captives were sanctioned by the Inquisition itself and carried out with terrifying systematicity. The rack, hooks, red-hot metal, hanging by limbs tied behind the back, all were aimed not at breaking the body, but the will, compelling the individual to renounce himself, his brethren, his own faith. Many did not hold out. Others, perhaps using cunning, confirmed the false accusations, hoping for leniency. But only the pyre awaited them. For a repentant heretic, having recanted his errors, was still subject to execution to atone for his sin.
The circular madness of the inquisitorial process offered no hope of deliverance. The very dissolution of the order at the Council of Vienne in 1312 was an act not so much of ecclesiastical justice as of political calculation. Pope Clement V, entirely dependent on the French crown, dared not contradict Philip's will. The papal bull Vox in Excelso formally ended the existence of the Order of the Temple, but it did not put an end to its saga. The legend was only beginning. After de Molay's execution, news spread across Europe that not all Templars had been arrested, that their network was too extensive to be destroyed by a single blow. It was claimed that on the night before the crackdown, a convoy with valuables and archives had managed to leave the Paris Temple. Where was it headed? Perhaps to the port of La Rochelle, where their ships awaited. Their trail dissolves, giving rise to countless conjectures. Some are convinced that the treasures, not so much gold as religious artifacts like the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail, were transported to Scotland, where the Templars found refuge with Robert the Bruce and integrated into the ranks of his army. Others suggest that their fleet managed to reach the shores of North America many decades before Columbus, and that traces of their presence can be found there in mysterious petroglyphs and unusual stone structures. Still others believe they went underground, preserving their organization and transmitting esoteric heritage from generation to generation, becoming the precursors of Masonic lodges. In Masonic rites and symbols, there are indeed many references to the Order of the Temple. Many lodges consider themselves the intellectual heirs of the Templars, guardians of their occult tradition. This motif of secret continuity resonates powerfully in culture. It lies at the foundation of countless literary works, from the novels of Sir Walter Scott to modern detective stories. The image of the Templar has become an archetype, the warrior monk, the keeper of secrets, the tragic hero, a victim of betrayal. Their saga is an endless reminder of the illusory nature of power, the might of rumor, the discord between religious ideal and material dominance. They remind us that any absolute truth, having fallen into human hands, inevitably becomes overgrown with myths, distortions, and mysteries, and sometimes it is already impossible to separate the real chronicle from the legend it spawned. And perhaps this is precisely their main secret, not in treasures, not in shrines, but in this very indefinite, elusive essence of their legacy, which still stirs the intellect and emotions, compelling us time and again to peer into the fog of the past in search of an answer that may never be destined to be found. And as long as we seek, as long as we remember, as long as we retell these stories in the silence of the night, the brotherhood of the Temple warriors continues to exist, not in stone or on parchment, but in the very fabric of our imagination, in the silent rustle of the past, audible across the ages. And this whisper becomes particularly distinct when we study the symbols they left behind. Their emblem depicting two horsemen on one horse is not just confirmation of need, it is a profound metaphor for their dual essence, warrior and monk, blade and prayer, movement and contemplation. Two fighters, yet one goal, one striving forward. This image speaks of unity, of mutual aid, of the fact that no one travels this path alone. Even their renowned red cross, which they placed on the left shoulder over the mantle, was not merely a distinguishing badge. It was a constant reminder of suffering, of the resolve to give one's life for the faith, and at the same time, a symbol of their mission, directed to all four corners of the world. It is said that their architecture, particularly in religious buildings they constructed, such as the round church of the London Temple, contained many encoded meanings. The circular geometry, lacking a classical altar projection, presumably referred to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and signified the universal, cosmopolitan nature of their service, extending beyond the limits of any single diocese or state. These structures were not just places of worship, they were manuscripts frozen in stone, preserving esoteric knowledge of geometry and sacred placement, comprehensible only to initiates.
Their daily life, even away from combat, was subject to strict regulation. Imagine an early morning in a commandery somewhere in the Auvergne, Catalonia. The bell rings, waking the brotherhood. Then follows the morning prayer, matins, after which everyone attends to their duties. Someone practices weapon skills in the inner courtyard, perfecting sword strikes and horsemanship. Another, literate, bends over accounting ledgers, recording payments from tenants or drawing up letters of credit. Someone oversees work in the fields or in the forge. Their meals, as the rule prescribed, were ascetic, often taken in silence, while one of the brethren read biblical texts aloud. It was an existence devoid of individual desires, subordinated to iron discipline and the ideals of community. Even their silence, enjoined by the rule at certain intervals, created a particularly concentrated atmosphere, so different from the loud and disordered world outside their cloisters. It was this organization and discipline that made them such a deadly force on the battlefield. In an attack, the Templar heavy cavalry was akin to a battering ram. Their tactics were simple but fatal: tight formation, shield cover, lowered lances, and a swift, crushing charge against the opponent, breaching their lines. They were renowned for their composure and almost superhuman resilience. Retreat was considered a disgrace for them, for they fought not for worldly glory, but for the remission of sins and in the name of the Lord. Chroniclers depict how small detachments of Templars, surrounded by a vastly superior enemy, preferred to die to the last man rather than lay down their arms. This fierce courage commanded respect even from their Saracen foes. Sultan Saladin, as chronicles attest, held a complex feeling towards them, a mixture of enmity and profound esteem. After the Battle of Hattin, where the Crusader army suffered a devastating defeat, he personally ordered the execution of all captured Templars, considering them the most fanatical and unyielding opponents. Yet he pardoned and ransomed other prisoners, acknowledging their valor. Yet behind this facade of unbending discipline and selfless bravery lurked another reality. Long-term existence in the East could not help but modify them. They adopted local customs, learned Arabic, wore under their armor lighter, more suitable clothing borrowed from Muslims. Some historians suggest that their perception of Islam was not as categorical as official doctrine demanded. An enemy you neighbor for decades, with whom you trade and conduct, if temporary, negotiations, gradually ceases to be an anonymous infidel and acquires human features. Perhaps it was precisely this cultural hybridity, this awareness of the ambiguity of the universe, rather than its dual division, that was the very heresy for which they were ultimately called to account. They had outgrown their age, and therein lay their tragedy. After the abolition of the Brotherhood, their lands and property were to be transferred to the Hospitallers, another powerful military monastic order. But in reality, the rulers in whose lands the Templar properties were located, primarily Philip the Fair, tried to keep the largest portion for themselves. The transfer process dragged on for years and was accompanied by endless litigation and outright violence.
Many castles were simply plundered, documentation destroyed or lost, which further contributed to the multiplication of secrets and speculation. The fate of ordinary members of the order varied. Some, after repentance, were released and lived out their days in monasteries or secular life. Others shared the fate of their leaders, ending their existence at the stake. Still others may have escaped to other countries, to Scotland, Portugal, Germany, where the pressure on them was not as severe, and assimilated among the local population, taking with them their knowledge and myths. It is precisely this idea of escape and preservation of secret wisdom that fuels the most enduring and romantic of legends, the legend of the Templar treasure. What was this treasure? If it was gold, its traces are lost in history. But what if the treasure was intangible?
What if the Templars, while in Jerusalem, conducted excavations on the site of the Temple of Solomon and found not gold and gems, but something far more valuable, ancient manuscripts, sacred writings, even perhaps lost gospels containing truths capable of shaking the foundations of Christianity? The idea that they were the keepers of some great secret, perhaps about the true nature of the Savior, about his bloodline, as popularly expounded in the Da Vinci Code, lacks substantial historical evidence, yet it is incredibly tenacious. It testifies to our inexhaustible thirst for counter-history, for the desire to discover hidden knowledge that would transform our world. Thus, gradually, the image of the historical Templars, effective bankers, disciplined fighters, and competent managers, was supplanted in the public consciousness by the image of the esoteric Templars, keepers of the Grail, occultists, and magicians. They became a reflection of our own secrets, our search for meaning, our fascination with figures who seemed to hold all the answers and were punished for it. Their saga is a labyrinth where truth and conjecture intertwine, and the deeper we enter it, the harder it is to find the way out. And perhaps there is no need to find this path. Maybe the true magic of their legacy lies precisely in this impossibility of isolating fact from fiction, in this eternal interplay between history and myth, which compels us time and again to turn to their fate, deciphering it like a captivating dream whose elements vanish upon waking, leaving behind only a vague but persistent feeling of having touched a great mystery. And this feeling of enigma becomes particularly poignant when we consider what remains outside the official protocols and judicial documents. There is a hypothesis that beneath the tough exterior of a military order lay an esoteric heart, a cohort of initiates guarding knowledge rooted in deepest antiquity. Perhaps this knowledge was connected not only with Christian artifacts, but also with pre-Christian traditions, with Gnostic doctrines, with the mysticism of numbers and architecture. It is said that their passion for construction, for the erection of Gothic cathedrals that arose precisely during their heyday, was not accidental. Legends link the Templars with the guilds of Freemasons. The complex symbolic system, rigid hierarchy, initiation rituals, all this brings the two brotherhoods close. Perhaps after the devastation of the order, surviving Templars found refuge in the Masonic lodges, transmitting to them not only craft secrets, but also their spiritual tradition, their aspiration to build a perfect temple, not of stone, but of the human soul. This connection with Freemasonry later had a tremendous impact on modern history. The ideas of the Enlightenment, the struggles for freedom of conscience, republican ideals, all of this, surprisingly often, was expressed in symbolism referring to the medieval warriors. For many thinkers of the 18th century, the Templars were not apostates, but victims of tyranny and religious extremism, early martyrs for freedom. Their image was purified and idealized. It inspired poets and writers, from Goethe to Walter Scott, whose novel Ivanhoe shaped the canonical image of the noble and mysterious Templar, living according to his own strict laws.
This image no longer had room for financial operations or tedious accounting, only the mantle with the red cross, the blade, and an irresolvable spiritual conflict. But where could their colossal fortune actually have disappeared? If we discard fantastic conjectures about transatlantic voyages, its gradual dissolution into the economic space of Europe seems more realistic. Part was expropriated by the crown and used to pay off debts and wage wars. Another part, transferred to the Hospitallers, contributed to their consolidation on Rhodes and later on Malta. Yet the most persistent rumors stubbornly point to Portugal. In this kingdom, on the edge of the then-known Oecumen, the Templars were not destroyed. Under the powerful patronage of King Denis I, they were merely transformed into a new order, the Order of Christ, which inherited all their possessions, fortresses, and crucially, their navigational expertise. It was under the eight-pointed cross of the Order of Christ, nearly identical to the Templar cross, that Portuguese caravels of the Age of Discovery set sail into the unknown.
Henry the Navigator, Grand Master of the Order of Christ, directed his expeditions along the African continent, relying on the resources and, presumably, on those very maps and navigational knowledge preserved in the Templar archives. There is a tradition that Vasco da Gama was not just a knight of the Order of Christ, but that his ship, the São Gabriel, bore that very red cross on its sails. Thus, the spirit of the Templars, their passion for discovery and their financial power, may have been embodied in the most grandiose human adventure, the exploration of the world's oceans. Their shadow can perhaps be discerned in other corners of history, in the stern black vestments of Prussian Junkers, in the discipline of the Teutonic knights who adopted their military expertise, in the rituals of certain student corporations and aristocratic clubs where the ideals of brotherhood and loyalty are still revered. Even in today's intelligence services, with their cult of confidentiality, hierarchy, and willingness to sacrifice oneself for a higher purpose, one can detect a distant echo of the Templar Order's structure. But perhaps their most important legacy is not material wealth or occult knowledge, but an idea itself. The idea that a person can unite within themselves the seemingly conflicting prayer and blade, humility and power, earthly affairs and spiritual aspirations. They were pioneers who attempted to establish a supranational, cross-border empire existing according to its own internal laws. In this, they anticipated their own time by centuries. Their downfall became a cautionary tale about what happens when such power becomes too independent, too wealthy, and too incomprehensible for the society it is meant to protect. Today, gazing upon the ruins of their fortresses, scattered from the coasts of Portugal to the deserts of the Middle East, we see not just stones, we see silent witnesses to a grandiose dream, a dream of a world protected by a union of fearless and selfless knights. A dream that ultimately proved to be a utopia, yet one forever etched into the collective memory of humanity as a symbol of an unattainable ideal. And so, when the wind rustles the leaves near ancient walls, or when in the silence of the evening you are left alone with your thoughts, it may seem that this whisper of the past reaches us, a reminder of knights who once believed they could transform the world, and paid the ultimate price for that belief. Their saga ended, but their mystery lives on. It does not demand a solution. It only requires that sometimes, closing our eyes, we allow ourselves to be transported into their world, filled with courage, faith, and unsolved enigmas. And in this journey of the imagination, to find something meaningful for ourselves as well. In this journey, we can try to imagine ourselves as the last of them, not the master at the stake, but a simple brother sergeant, miraculously evading arrest in that distant province. He sits in a half-ruined hut somewhere in the foothills of the Pyrenees, watching the setting sun, and fragmentary images of the past arise in his memory.
He remembers not the heat of the battle at Acre, nor the splendor of the Paris treasury, but ordinary things, the scent of sun-warmed stone in the castle courtyard, the taste of a simple flatbread and wine after a long journey, the stern but reliable faces of the brethren with whom he shared both hardships and rare moments of peace. He thinks not of the order's grand mission or its secrets, but of the fact that it all collapsed in an instant, like a house of cards under the blows of an invisible enemy. And perhaps in his heart there is neither anger nor desire for revenge, only a quiet, all-encompassing sorrow and incomprehension. Why? For what were all these sacrifices, all this devotion, all this faith made, if in the end everything turned to dust and ashes? These questions, with no answers, hang in the very air enveloping the chronicle of the Templars, making it not just annals, but a genuine human tragedy of colossal proportions, difficult to comprehend. It is precisely this existential sorrow, mixed with awe at their power, that fuels countless hypotheses about their survival. Certainly, one of the most refined and poetic legends tells that the Brotherhood was not merely exterminated, but merely retreated into the shadows, transformed into a secret order that continues to exist to this day, invisibly influencing the course of history.
According to this version, the most enlightened and initiated brethren foresaw their downfall and prepared for it. They did not resist openly, aware of the futility of such a struggle, but preserved the most important things, their inner elite, their sacred relics, and their knowledge. They dispersed throughout the cities and villages of Europe, becoming alchemists and healers, scientists and artists, navigators and thinkers. They continued their work, but no longer under the banner of the Red Cross, but under the guise of ordinary craftsmen or scholars, passing the torch from hand to hand, from generation to generation. Perhaps it was their hidden influence that spurred the Renaissance, that flowering of sciences and arts. Perhaps their brush guided the pen of some outstanding humanists who protested against the dominance of church dogma. In this paradigm, the Templars appear not as victims, but as far-sighted strategists who sacrificed the external form to preserve their soul, that is, the ideals of freedom and knowledge they professed. Another, no less fascinating line leads us to Scotland. According to this tradition, the Templar fleet, laden with valuables and manuscripts, found refuge in the remote bays and inlets of this harsh land. Here, in the midst of the struggle for independence, they offered their swords to King Robert the Bruce, and it is said that in the decisive Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, the very year de Molay perished at the stake, the appearance on the battlefield of an armored cavalry of unknown warriors turned the tide of the battle and brought the Scots a triumphant victory. This story, though it has found no conclusive confirmation in the annals, is incredibly persistent. It speaks of the nobility of warriors unbroken by betrayal, seeking a new worthy cause, and of just retribution reaching their persecutors even at the edge of the earth. It is said that the descendants of these exiles merged into the Scottish clans, and their knowledge formed the basis of the unique system of Freemasonry that later spread across the entire planet. Thus, the image of the Templar appears astonishingly plastic. It is like a blank canvas onto which each successive generation projects its own fears, hopes, and ideals. For some, they are occultists and sorcerers. For others, educated humanists ahead of their time. For still others, the first bankers and sensible pragmatists. For yet others, the last idealists fallen under the onslaught of a cynical world. This multifaceted nature makes their saga perpetually relevant. It compels us to reflect on the nature of power, the price of sovereignty, the relationship between the individual and the system, faith and reason. Ultimately, in deciphering the riddle of the Templars, we are partly trying to decipher the riddle of ourselves, our craving for heroism, for mystery, and for the search for higher meaning in the swift current of time.
And as long as these questions continue to trouble us, the mantle with the red cross will still flutter in the wind of history, inviting all seekers and dreamers to follow it into the misty but incredibly alluring past, where reality and legend fuse together, forming a story one wants to listen to again and again, each time finding in it new, previously unseen nuances and meanings, leading thoughts on a serene voyage across the waves of time. This voyage across the waves of ages leads us to a quiet yet inevitable conclusion. The legacy of the Templars cannot be measured only by citadels and armor. It exists in the very concept of selflessness, not to a king, not to a state, but to something higher and more abstract, a vow, a unity, an ideal. In our era, often devoid of such all-encompassing meanings, their fate reminds us that man is capable of absolute self-sacrifice in the name of a goal far exceeding the boundaries of his own life. This idea both frightens and captivates. It frightens because it shows how easily this devotion can be broken and slandered. It captivates because its very possibility testifies to the hidden titanic power of the human spirit. Therefore, when in the future you see somewhere in an old church an image of a knight in a mantle with a red cross, or notice an 8-pointed cross on an antique map, or simply hear the rustle of the pages of an old book in the silence, pause for a moment.
Allow yourself to imagine not ghosts and not treasures, but living persons, weary, believing, doubting, courageous. People who offered prayers in the pre-dawn silence, felt the weight of armor in the scorching midday, gazed at the stars over foreign lands, and believed that their path led to something meaningful and eternal. Their pyres have long since gone out, their strongholds lie in ruins, but the echo of their footsteps is still audible somewhere very deep, on a level perceptible only to a heart prepared to listen. Perhaps this is precisely their highest secret, not in gold hidden in dungeons, nor in manuscripts of forbidden wisdom, but in the simple yet so powerful ability, 7 centuries later, to still inspire us to dream, to seek, to admire, and to empathize. They have achieved a kind of immortality, not individual, but collective, dissolving into the ocean of human narratives, becoming its integral and most mysterious part. And now, when the evening outside the window deepens and thoughts lose their sharpness, preparing for sleep, one can let go of all efforts to get to the truth. One can simply accept this story as it is, majestic, tragic, and infinitely beautiful in its incompleteness. Allow the final image, a lone knight frozen on a fortress wall, gazing at the starry sky over the Holy Land, to slowly fade into the darkness. He awaits no answer. He simply stands guard. And in this quiet, unwavering devotion, there is everything one needs to know about the mystery called the Templars. May this image accompany you into the kingdom of dreams, where history and fantasy intertwine, granting peace and inspiration. And this image of the lone guardian on the wall smoothly transitions into a reflection on the very essence of their legacy, which, like a quiet underground river, continues to nourish the soil of our civilization. We can trace its influence in the most unexpected spheres, far removed from theaters of war and financial reports. Take, for instance, the very concept of secrecy. The Templars elevated it to a virtue, and this practice became deeply embedded in the Western mentality. The idea that true power and true knowledge must be hidden from the profane, that there is an esoteric core accessible only to initiates, has passed through the ages. It manifested in alchemical writings where simple recipes veiled spiritual truths, in the rituals of secret societies, in the very structure of scientific communities where professional terminology serves as a kind of password distinguishing adepts from the uninitiated.
Their shadow can be seen in the cold efficiency of modern corporations, with their closed boards of directors and commercial confidentiality. Is this not an echo of that same closed, powerful structure, subject only to its own internal laws? Even their tragic end became an archetypal plot, which we encounter again and again in art. The narrative of an all-powerful structure destroyed by a treacherous state, of heroes slandered and fallen as martyrs to their own greatness, became eternal. We see its reflections in the fates of many historical figures, and even in the plots of modern blockbusters. The confrontation of D'Artagnan with a powerful and invisible enemy, the intrigues in Game of Thrones, where honor becomes vulnerability, all this partly refers us to the drama of the Templars. Their fall is the first large-scale witch hunt in European history, where the state machine employed propaganda, judicial forgery, and torture to eliminate an inconvenient internal enemy. This precedent showed that anyone, even the most influential institution, is defenseless against concentrated state power backed by public opinion. This lesson learned 5 centuries ago remains relevant today. Yet there is another, more positive side to their legacy, their unprecedented for their era supranationality. A knight from England, serving under a master from France, in a stronghold in the Middle East, financed by lands in Italy. This was a prototype of a global citizen, an individual whose identity was determined not by language or origin, but an idea and membership in a brotherhood.
At a time when future nation-states were taking shape, they offered a different universalist paradigm. And although their project failed, the idea itself did not die. It was adopted by Renaissance humanists, Enlightenment philosophers, and is evident in the principles of international organizations. Their network of commanderies, united by a common rule and mission, was a medieval internet, a precursor to a globalized space where information, capital, and people move across borders. And their financial innovations, they not only created checks, they created a culture of reputation. In a world where a lord's word could be broken on a whim and a contract annulled by force of arms, a Templar's promise was unshakable. Their integrity became their primary asset. And this, perhaps, is the most paradoxical aspect of their saga. Monks who had taken a vow of poverty became the most reliable financiers precisely because their oath made them impervious to material temptations. This absolute guarantee, based on spiritual prestige, is a phenomenon almost unthinkable in our contemporary financial world, built on risks and collateral. Their system was based not on legal norms, but on trust. And this constituted both their rise and their downfall. Once the reputation was destroyed, the mechanism collapsed instantly. And so we see that the Templars are not just a paragraph in a history textbook. They are a living archetype, a multi-dimensional symbol. They symbolize the strength born of restraint, the danger of excessive influence, the tragedy of self-sacrifice, the triumph of slander, and the dream of harmonious unity. Each era finds something of its own in them. The Romantics of the 19th century saw them as noble martyrs, occultists as guardians of ancient wisdom, positivist historians as competent administrators and bankers. Their saga is a giant mirror in which humanity examines its own fears, ideals, and antagonisms. And as long as we continue to do so, they remain with us. Their mystery continues to breathe. Their myth continues to grow, becoming overgrown with new layers, like a stalagmite in a cave, slowly but inexorably, drop by drop, century by century. And this cave leads us even deeper, into the most hidden recesses of their legacy, to that which is not explicitly stated, but implied in the very structure of their being. It concerns their relationship with knowledge.
In a world where dogma often prevailed over inquiry, they, being at the crossroads of civilizations, inevitably became transmitters not only of goods but also of ideas. It can be assumed that their fortresses were not only defensive structures, but also quiet centers of study. Study of what? Perhaps astronomy, necessary for navigation and cartography. Perhaps medicine, to treat wounds and illnesses in their communities. Or perhaps something more profound, the fundamentals of mechanics for construction, the principles of geometry, revered as the divine language of the universe. Their silence, prescribed by the rule, created an ideal atmosphere for deep reflection, for the inner work of the spirit. They were warriors, but their long periods of inactivity between campaigns and guard duty could not be filled only with prayer. These intervals were a breeding ground for intellectual activity, for correspondence and the study of documents they had managed to collect during expeditions in the East. Thus, their community, without realizing it themselves, arguably became one of those subterranean channels through which the seeds of the future Renaissance began to seep into a dormant Europe. They were not philosophers in the academic sense of the word, they were practitioners, but it was precisely their practical needs to keep accounts, build fortresses, heal people, navigate by sea and land that compelled them to value knowledge and perhaps to accumulate it wherever it existed. And in this lies their other quiet and unassuming service to history. This continuous accumulation and assimilation of wisdom, carried out in silence, became as significant a part of their service as their military exploits. The Templars found themselves at a unique point of contact between worlds, the Christian West and the Muslim East. This location granted them access to knowledge that had been forgotten or had never reached European universities.
Arabic treatises on mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, preserving the ancient heritage, could filter into their libraries. It was possibly through them that Europe rediscovered Aristotle and other ancient philosophers. Their interest in the exact sciences was not idle curiosity, but a stern necessity. Administering a colossal financial empire required complex calculations. Building impregnable citadels required deep knowledge of geometry and mechanics. Distant sea voyages required an understanding of the laws of astronomy. They became the first practicing universal engineers of the Middle Ages. Their strongholds, such as Atlit or Tortosa, were masterpieces of defensive art, taking into account all the achievements of military science from both West and East. Their ships were among the best in the Mediterranean. Their accounting system surpassed all contemporary analogs. All this points to a structure that prioritized efficiency and knowledge. And in this context, their secrecy and initiation rites acquire a new dimension. Perhaps these were not merely religious rituals, but also a procedure for transmitting specialized, almost professional skills, from the art of desert warfare to the secrets of financial reporting. The initiate not only took an oath of loyalty, but was also incorporated into a corporation of experts in their craft, where discipline of mind and skill was valued as highly as discipline of the spirit. This explains their phenomenal stability and productivity. They were not just fanatics, but a highly skilled elite, whose power was based on a symbiosis of unwavering faith with technologies and management methods advanced for their time. And it was this alliance of spiritual fervor and dispassionate rational approach that made them so frightening to the outside world. The medieval commoner could understand and forgive a sin provoked by passion or weakness, but what filled him with sacred terror was this icy, impersonal, almost machine-like perfectionism, serving not personal gain, but an abstract idea. This surpassed the boundaries of ordinary human experience. Hence, rumor attributed to them a pact with the devil, for only supernatural forces could, in the eyes of their contemporaries, explain their prosperity. Thus, the tragedy of the Templars was predetermined by their very triumph.
Having created perfect organizational mechanics, they ceased to be comprehensible to the society of which they were nominally a part. Their rationality, their supranationality, their economic power challenged the feudal order, which was based on personal bonds, localism, and primitive, crude force. They were the first people of the modern age, lost in an era not yet ready to receive them. They were crushed not by progress, but by archaism concentrated into a fist in the person of royal power, which itself was only beginning its journey towards centralization and rational state governance. Philip the Fair, ironically, used against them the very methods the Templars had perfected: systematic approach, total control of information, ruthless efficiency. He defeated them with their own tools, but he used these tools in the interests of the old world order, a monarchy based on divine right and landed aristocracy. In this sense, the trial of the Templars was not just the execution of an inconvenient creditor. It was a battle between two models of power organization: the corporate transnational, embodied by the order, and the nation-state, represented by the French crown. And in the 14th century, victory belonged to the latter. Yet the idea embodied by the Templars did not disappear. It went underground, diffused into culture, and was reborn in new forms. Their spirit of entrepreneurship and global thinking rose again in the age of discovery. Their corporate structure became a prototype for the Dutch and British East India Companies. Their cult of discipline and secrecy found continuation in modern armies and intelligence services. Even their attraction to esotericism transformed into scientific inquiry, where the search for the philosopher's elixir gave way to the discovery of chemical elements, and astrology to astronomy. They were defeated as a structure, but their methods and approaches to problem-solving proved astonishingly resilient.
And perhaps this is their true, most significant treasure: not a chest of coins, but an algorithm for success, based on unity of purpose, discipline, knowledge, and reputation. An algorithm that, stripped of its religious content, continues to function in the most diverse fields of human activity. And every time we encounter the phenomenon of a super-effective, cohesive, and closed team achieving remarkable results, whether it be a scientific laboratory, a tech startup, or an elite military unit, we involuntarily recall the white mantles with the crimson cross. Their fate teaches us that any power that has too far outrun its time and become too isolated from society risks being destroyed by that society. But it also shows that the ideas born of this power prove immortal. They, like seeds, can lie dormant in the earth for a long time, only to sprout in a more favorable era. So it was with the legacy of the Templars. It bided its time to germinate in a world that had finally matured to recognize the importance of global interconnections, financial instruments, scientific knowledge, and meritocracy. And in this lies the central paradox and the central victory of the Templars. They lost the battle, but ultimately won the war for minds. Their defeat turned into a legend that inspired the search for alternative routes to the same goals: knowledge, order, and power based not on brute force, but on intelligence and systematic thinking. And now, in our age of information, when borders are blurring and corporations sometimes wield influence comparable to that of states, we understand them, these medieval warrior monks, far better than their contemporaries did. We see in them not sorcerers and heretics, but the first globalists, the first corporate managers, the first cross-cultural negotiators. Their drama appears strikingly resonant with our era: the conflict between innovation and tradition, between the global and the local, between efficiency and interpersonal relationships. And so, falling asleep to the whisper of this saga, we fall asleep not just with a beautiful tale of the past, we fall asleep with a reflection on the enduring conflicts of human society, on the price of progress, and on the mystery of those who are always striving forward, illuminating the path for others, but often burning in the flame of their own lighthouse. Allow then this radiance, refracted through the prism of centuries, to softly lull you,
transporting you to a world where valor and reason, treachery and devotion, reality and fiction intertwine in a single eternal song, the song of the warriors of the temple, whose mystery still resides somewhere between the lines of chronicles, in the silence of libraries, and in the twinkling of distant stars under which they once carried out their arduous service. And may their example, an example of boundless commitment to an ideal, even at the moment of its collapse, remain with you as a reminder that the strongest fortresses are built not from stone, but from convictions and brotherhood, and that these citadels cannot be destroyed by any earthly power. Sleep serenely, taking with you into your dreams the gleam of their crimson crosses and the knowledge of their unfinished yet infinitely captivating saga. May the tranquility and inspiration born of this story remain with you until dawn, when a new day brings its own cares and achievements, but a grain of that ancient mystery will still smolder in the heart, like a silent, inextinguishable beacon in the night of time. Their legacy, like an underground river, continues to feed the modern world, seeping into its various spheres. Consider, for instance, the concept of double-entry bookkeeping. Although there is no direct evidence that it was invented specifically by the Templars, their vast financial web spanning continents required incredibly meticulous and reliable accounting methods. Perhaps their accounting ledgers, lost in the fires of repression and looting, contained prototypes of those very principles of debit and credit that later, in the hands of Italian merchants of the Renaissance, were structured into a coherent doctrine. Their banking operations, essentially the first interstate transactions in history, laid the foundation for the modern financial infrastructure. In this context, every time you pay with a bank card or make an online transfer, you are paying homage to the brilliant simplicity of their system, built on trust.
Their military innovations also did not vanish into oblivion. The tactics of heavy cavalry, honed by them in battles with the light cavalry of the East, influenced the development of European knighthood. Their emphasis on discipline, coordinated action, and subordination to a single rule rather than individual glory anticipated the formation of regular armies of the modern age. A soldier for whom duty and orders are more important than personal valor is no longer a knight in the classical sense. This is a new type of warrior, and the Templars were among the first to initiate this transition. Even their severe asceticism and disdain for comforts find parallels in the regulations of elite special forces units worldwide, where the ability to endure hardship is valued no less than combat skills. But perhaps the most subtle and profound impact they had was on the very culture of the West, on its attitude towards mystery and knowledge. The medieval world was a world of manifest miracles and publicly accessible dogma. The Templars, however, unwittingly introduced the idea that truth could be hidden, that its comprehension required preparation, initiation, that there existed an esoteric core not intended for the masses. This concept, passing through alchemy, Freemasonry, and Romanticism, became deeply rooted in European consciousness. It spawned a vast body of literature and art focused on solving mysteries, on the search for implicit meanings. From the quest for the Holy Grail in chivalric romances to the conspiracy thrillers of the 21st century, everywhere we see the imprint of this paradigm, elevated by the Templars to the status of a life principle. They turned history itself into a detective story, a puzzle to be solved. And this contest of deciphering, this feeling that behind the visible world lies another, more authentic and intricate world order, became a powerful engine of intellectual and artistic inquiry. The paradox is that they themselves, in all likelihood, perceived their secrets not as mystical revelations, but as purely applied professional know-how. How to conduct reconnaissance, how to build a citadel on sandy soil, how to detect counterfeit coin, how to negotiate with an Arab emir.
However, the outside world, lacking access to this knowledge, mythologized it, turning it into magic and heresy. Thus was born the endless narrative of cursed knowledge, possession of which brings both power and doom. The Templars became its first and most vivid heroes. Their tragic end, execution at the stake, became the archetypal illustration of the price paid by the bearer of forbidden truth. This archetype has since migrated from work to work, from Faust to Frankenstein, from the scientist-inventor to the hacker who cracked the system. Therefore, assessing their significance, we must look not only backward into the 12th century, but also forward through subsequent eras. They were like a strange seed fallen into the soil of medieval Europe. From it grew a mighty tree which was cut down, but its pollen scattered everywhere, and from it sprouted new growths, different, dissimilar, yet carrying within them part of the same genetic code. The code of efficiency based on discipline and knowledge. The code of devotion to an idea transcending individual interests. The code of global thinking in a world of local loyalties. Today, in the era of artificial intelligence, blockchain, and spaceflight, their saga resonates with particular poignancy. We again exist in a world where small groups of initiates possessing complex technologies and confidential knowledge wield colossal power, incomprehensible and frightening to the majority. We again witness the conflict between transnational corporations and nation-states. We again fear the power we have created and do not fully understand. In this respect, we are contemporaries of the Templars, merely clad in different clothes and speaking a different language. Their fate is a mirror in which we can discern our own anxieties and dilemmas. So when you next hear of a powerful technology company whose algorithms govern our lives, or of a secret diplomatic agreement reshaping the map of the world, recall the white mantles with the crimson crosses.
Recall the web of commanderies that enmeshed Europe. Recall the trust that was their primary asset and the treachery that devalued that capital. Their saga is not just a bedtime story. It is a parable about the immutable laws of power, knowledge, and human nature. A parable reminding us that all progress has its price, that all power breeds envy, and that the most reliable asset is not gold in vaults, but an honest word and loyalty to a brotherhood. And even when that brotherhood crumbles to dust, the very idea of such unity continues to shine, like a lone star in the evening sky, pointing the way for those who still believe that one can be both warrior and monk, pragmatist and dreamer, serving something greater than oneself. Allow then this light, refracted through the lens of 8 centuries, to guide you into the kingdom of dreams. May it soothe troubled thoughts and fill the evening with a sense of belonging to the great endless saga of humanity, where every era, every heroic and sorrowful tale similar to that of the Templars is merely a chapter in the infinite book of the search for truth, justice, and meaning. Sleep deeply and serenely, knowing that even in the densest darkness of the past, there is always a quiet, undying ember of memory and legend, warming hearts and awakening imagination. And may your dreams be as captivating and filled with mystery as the saga of the warriors of the temple, whose echo has not faded to this day. Their saga, like a spiral of time, returns to us again and again, acquiring new facets in each retelling. Imagine a chain of invisible continuities stretching through the ages, from the austere halls of the Paris Temple to the quiet lodges of Freemasons in 18th century London, from the misty highlands of Scotland, where, according to legend, fleeing brethren found refuge, to the offices of the Rothschild bankers constructing their international financial system. In each of these phenomena, one can discern a reflection of the same organizational genius, the same understanding that true power lies not in public fame, but in strong ties, trust, and control over the flow of information and capital.
Even their demise became a kind of prototype, a template for future purges and political tribunals. The mechanism refined by Philip the Fair, a synthesis of pervasive propaganda, surprise arrests, torture to extract desired testimonies, and confiscation of property under the guise of fighting an enemy of the nation, proved monstrously effective. Its echoes can be discerned in the witch trials, in Stalin's repressions, in the work of McCarthy's committees. The Templars were the first in a long line of those whom the state machine decided to liquidate, having first demonized them in the public eye. Their fate is a textbook on how powerful institutions are destroyed, and simultaneously a warning about the fragility of any society in the face of fabricated lies reinforced by terror and greed. Yet if their downfall is a lesson in darkness, their rise is a lesson in the light of human spirit and mind. They proved that even within the confines of the harsh doctrines of their era, it was possible to create something innovative. Their order was an experiment in forming an ideal collective, where vice and personal gain were suppressed by the rule, where each served the common mission, and the common mission served, as they believed, God. It was a prototype for utopian communes and idealistic projects of the future, from the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay to the kibbutzim in Israel. Their dream of a brotherhood free from borders and class prejudices proved incredibly contagious. It outlived them and continued to allure intellectuals, revolutionaries, and dreamers. Today, in a world of digital global networks, their legacy acquires a literally new technological dimension. Cryptography, underlying blockchain and secure communications, is a direct heir to the ancient art of secret writing and ciphers, which was undoubtedly familiar to the financial empire of the Templars. The concept of decentralized trust, requiring no centralized authority, as in cryptocurrencies, philosophically echoes their system of letters of credit. Reputation was guaranteed not by a monarch or bishop, but by the prestige of the order itself, its brand. Their network of commanderies was an analog internet, a protocol for moving value and information across political borders.
In a sense, they were the first to attempt to record trust, to make it transferable and verifiable, albeit on parchment, not in a digital ledger. Thus, the spirit of the Templars proves astonishingly contemporary. It materializes not in ghosts wandering castle ruins, but in lines of code, in financial algorithms, in the very architecture of our interdependent world. Their tragedy warns us of the dangers lurking for any closed, overly influential system: isolation, jealousy, misunderstanding from the outside world. Their success inspires us to seek forms of association that combine efficiency with a lofty purpose, discipline with unity. And so, falling asleep, we can think of them not as distant knights from dusty canvases, but as our strange, anachronistic contemporaries. Of their failed yet magnificent attempt to construct a world according to their own laws. Of their belief that order, knowledge, and duty could overcome chaos. Their flame died out long ago on the Inquisition's pyres, but sparks from it ignited thousands of other fires. These fires glimmer in the laboratories of researchers seeking truth, in the offices of entrepreneurs creating new worlds, in the hearts of all who believe that commitment to an ideal and loyalty to one's promise are not artifacts of the past, but perhaps the only reliable currency in a perpetually transforming world. Allow, then, this feeling, a feeling of connection to the great unbroken chain of seekers, builders, and guardians, to rock you to sleep. May your rest be deep and serene, guarded by the invisible sentinel of the centuries. And when morning breaks, you will arise, carrying within you the quiet yet persistent echo of their saga, a reminder that even the most formidable dominance is fragile, yet the simplest ideas, valor, brotherhood, honesty,
prove harder than metal, and outlive any empire. Sleep, then, wrapped in the mantle of this ancient saga, and let its final phrases dissolve into silence, leaving behind only a feeling of boundless peace and mystery, which now also belongs to you. Their story is not a petrified myth, but a living river whose waters feed countless streams of today's culture. Consider the very emblems they left behind. The simple crimson cross on a white field ceased to be merely the badge of a warrior monk. It transformed into an emblem of self-sacrifice, daring, and service, inspiring the symbolism of many organizations, from chivalric orders of the modern age to contemporary charitable and medical missions. The aesthetic itself, purity of white, redness of red, asceticism of lines, became archetypal for images associated with mystery, initiation, and a high mission. Even their imagined vices, invented or exaggerated by their accusers, took on a life of their own in art. The statue of the idol Baphomet, born in the dungeons of the Inquisition, was adopted by subsequent centuries and reinterpreted, from a demonic symbol in occultism to an ironic or philosophical image in contemporary culture, representing rejected, heretical knowledge. Thus, the slander intended to destroy their prestige ultimately only enriched their mythical image, adding to it a dark, Gothic charm so alluring to romantics and decadents. Yet beyond the symbols and legends, there is also a purely material, archaeological legacy. The fragments of their strongholds, scattered from the coasts of Portugal to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, still stir the imagination. These cyclopean stone structures are not just defensive buildings, they are formulas frozen in stone, where every tower, every buttress, every underground tunnel is a solution to a specific engineering problem: how to withstand a siege, how to supply a garrison with water, how to control the landscape. Standing before the mass of Crac des Chevaliers or exploring the labyrinths of Tomar Castle, we come into contact not just with history, but with the minds of their architects. These citadels are their statement, their answer to the challenges of a hostile environment. And this statement proved so brilliant that many of these fortifications remained impregnable for centuries. Also interesting is their influence on legal and administrative thought. Being a state within a state, they created their own internal jurisdiction.
Their rule regulated not only the spiritual sphere, but also criminal offenses, property disputes, and disciplinary sanctions within the brotherhood. This autonomous legal system, subject only to the Pope and the Grand Master, challenged the feudal fragmentation of law, where each village operated under its own customs. In this sense, they again anticipated the future unified legal systems of centralized states. Their judicial procedures, their methods of evidence and sanctions, though harsh, were a step towards order and systematization. Finally, their history is an eternal lesson on the role of the individual in history. Despite all the power of the order's corporate machine, at its end, we see living individuals. Jacques de Molay, broken by torture, yet finding the courage to renounce the lies and face death with dignity. The ordinary brethren, dying at the stakes, preserving their loyalty to their oath. Or those who, perhaps, escaped, carrying with them the memory of the brotherhood. Their individual dramas, their choice between existence and honor, their terror and their courage, this is what turns this saga not into a detached case study, but into a human tragedy, touching hearts across centuries. They remind us that behind every historical event, behind the rise and fall of empires, there are concrete individuals with their fears, hopes, and decisions. Thus, returning to the initial question, who they really were, we come to the conclusion that the answer lies not in one of the polarities, not in the image of sinless martyrs, nor in the image of apostate heretics. They were a complex, contradictory phenomenon,
a product of their era and simultaneously its disruptors. They were sincerely believing warriors for whom combat was prayer, and at the same time, sober-minded financiers who established the first transnational empire. They were a support of papal power and simultaneously its implicit threat because their influence challenged the Church's monopoly on spiritual and material dominance. Their greatest secret, perhaps, lies precisely in this duality, in this ability to unite conflicting elements while remaining whole in their internal self-discipline. They were ascetic knights in a world of feudal knights, monk bankers in a world of lay usurers, globalists in a world of parochialism. This otherness ultimately destroyed them, yet it also guaranteed them immortality in legend. Therefore, when you listen to the whisper of history about the Templars, listen to it not as a tale of a long-vanished order. Listen to it as an echo of fundamental questions any society faces. How to unite a spiritual ideal with worldly power. How to build a reputation in a world full of treachery. At what cost are progress and innovation paid? And where is the line beyond which an organization's power and success become its sentence? Let these reflections, lulled by the measured rhythm of a distant but ever-living saga, smoothly flow into the world of your dreams. Let your subconscious paint images of impregnable fortresses, silent prayers in the morning twilight, the gleam of coins in strictly accounted chests, and finally, the undying flame of the pyre in which flesh was incinerated, but not the idea. Sleep deeply, knowing that the past is not a foreign country, but a part of ourselves, and the mystery of the Knights of the Temple still exists in stone, in symbols, in financial systems, and most importantly, in our insatiable desire to comprehend it. Free your mind, allow it to drift into the warm waters of tranquility, carrying away the last glimmer of the crimson cross on a white mantle, dissolving into the approaching silence of the night. Peaceful dreams.